All right, radio listeners, today we're going to talk about a topic I think is very important here in the state of Kansas as folks around the nation are trying to call out all the liberals that we have. We have them in both parties, and I think it's very important that Kansans look at our Republican Party first and see where our RINOs are at. We've got a primary coming here on August 7th, just knocking on the door. People have a chance to really make a difference. And we're going to do that today. We're going to call out some RINOs in the Kansas Republican Party, and I can't think of anyone better to help me do that than Larry Halloran. Larry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Paul?
I'm doing real good. And folks, I would just give you a little bit of back history on Larry Halloran. Larry is an inspirational guy to me. He's a patriot. He's been involved in a lot of the Kansas Tea Parties, which the movement has been for limited government, the Constitution, traditional values. He works with the 912 group. And he's involved in a lot of stuff, and they have a collection of research on our Kansas politicians and really calling out the RINOs. Larry, what is the URL where people can go to take a look for themselves on that information?
They can find them at www.ks912state, the word state, STATE.org. And just look on the Senate Imposter page. They're linked up there.
When you click on that Senate Imposter page, you're going to get a listing of a lot of people. And I want to talk about those people as much as we can with the time that we have today and really lay the goods out, because there's a pile of propaganda going on there. You know this very well, and I think people in Radioland will, that when it comes down to election time, especially in the Republican Party in the primary, everybody wants to pretend to be as conservative as possible. They want to lean towards that conservative majority, but they're not all conservative. We've got some people that are hurting the party. We've got some people that are just, really hurting our state and the country. And let's just kind of go down the list. I'm seeing our list here. One of the first and a well-known one in our area where we're broadcasting is a guy by the name of Brungart. Tell folks about this guy.
Well, my first experience with Senator Brungart was actually back in 2006. I provided some testimony on the veterans issue. So we went to his federal and state committee. So in 2009, he was the chairman of that committee then, and he's still the chairman of the committee. In 2009, I got involved in trying to promote the state sovereignty resolution, and I couldn't understand why that resolution had been held through the entire 2009 session without a hearing. And on the last day of the session, I called for patriots to meet me at the Capitol, trying to convince our legislators on signing day to keep themselves in special session or agree to come back in a special session to deal with the state sovereignty resolution. I felt it was important that we tell the federal government, even in a non-binding resolution, that we intended to, in fact, exercise our 10th Amendment rights in Kansas, and that we would not be overrun by an overbearing federal government. I called a number of Republican senators that I remember the names of, Pete being one of them, in advance of going there that day, and asked for his support. When I had him on the phone, he just laughed at me, and when I asked him if he believed in the Constitution, he hung up on me. Later that day, or later on signing day, when the session ended, I got onto the Senate floor and actually got into a discussion with Tim Owens, and Senator Brungart came by and let me know emphatically that I should never question his understanding of the Constitution. Being a retired Navy senior chief, I believe I've committed myself and have the authority and the right to question anybody that represents us in government.
Yeah.
But it became very clear in our discussion with Tim Owens as to why he hadn't held a hearing on that resolution, and with Pete's response that these two people, while I had believed that they represented my Republican values, because I really hadn't been involved in state politics other than to vote for the Republican, the one with the R, the one I believed that carried my values and principles. And it was obvious to me that these two gentlemen did not share the same principles and beliefs in the Republican values that I held. And it was a signal then, and that there was some investigation that needed to be done through the work of others like Bob Weeks at the Voice for Liberty in Wichita,
Yeah.
Kansas Taxpayers Network, AFP that had accumulated some scorecards and stuff on these legislators over the years, and beginning to go to the hearings and go to and tracking their votes, we were able to put together a tremendous amount of information on these folks over the life of their service, stuff that's normally not available to the citizens, where you could actually look at their lifetime voting records on life issues, health care, state sovereignty, property rights, the Constitution, you name it. And it was very clear now that these people really represented the minority party up there and really did not hold to the principles and values that are laid out in the Republican Party platform.
Well, I agree with you. And Larry, there are so many people in Kansas that are getting ready to go vote. And they're like, we hear all this national information, but we just don't know what's going on at the state level. We don't know that intricate information. You got the propaganda coming out full swing. And just so people know, and I didn't put the first name, we're talking about Senator Pete Brungart. And a lot of people know him out of the Saline County area, in the Salina and surrounding. In your information that you've got at kansas912state.org, when you're looking at the senator imposters, it shows here that he is 20.4% rating for his conservative voting when it comes to fiscal issues, and he votes with Senate Democrats 80% of the time. If you're voting with a party 80% of the time, you ought to be with that party. I mean, you're there with them. And so that's the problem that we have here in the state, is that we've got people that this ruse, this destructive ruse, that there needs to be quote unquote moderates in the Republican Party. I hear that. I've got people that these guys come up to people's homes, want to put yard signs in, and they're bold enough to say, I'm a moderate Republican, as if that should be the decider. And to me, Larry, those people are destroying the Constitution right here in our own backyard.
Absolutely. And it's not only that they're destroying the Constitution, they are unwilling to do anything that would protect the state of Kansas or to support the rights of the state and the citizens for those things that were not given to the federal government. They are all about allowing the federal government to exercise their will over us, regardless of what the issue is. Let's take a real good example, a current example of something that's being put out into the mailers to Republican voters for the primary from many of these RINOs, these really phony Republicans, telling the voters that they indeed opposed Obamacare. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. What happened in 2010, and you got to remember, the 2010 legislative session occurred before, in advance of the 2010 general national election, okay, and state elections for House members. The Senate was not up for election in 2010, but the actual legislative session occurred early in the year, January to May. So there were two separate bills introduced, one in the House and one in the Senate, the constitutional amendments allowing to provide the opportunity for Kansas, the citizens of Kansas, to exercise their right and express their desires with regard to health care and how health care would be managed, reserving the right to pay cash for doctor's visits or to purchase insurance on their own. It would have given the citizens of Kansas an opportunity to amend their Constitution and exercise their voice. However, our senators and many in the House that were controlled by the progressive side did not want citizens to exercise that right. So when it came up for a vote in the House in 2010, they couldn't muster the two-thirds majority. In the Senate, the act was actually given to two separate committees. One of them was Federal and State, and the other was the Judiciary Committee. The Federal and State passed it out without any recommendation. The Judiciary Committee sat on it. They had a subcommittee that worked on it, and it convinced Senator Pilcher-Cook that what they really needed to do was enact a statute. Okay, well, it was amended in the committee, and at first it didn't. They couldn't get it out because there was a tie vote, and Judiciary Chairman Owens took this so-called moral high ground and said that he wouldn't cast a tie-breaking vote in this case to send it out to the floor for debate. So he didn't cast a vote. There were many of us there that day, and we raised Cain over the night. He agreed to have another vote the next day when some missing members were there. However, on the next day, when the opportunity came and the vote was actually to pass it out to the committee, he then cast the vote to tie it up and hold it in committee again under the guise that they hadn't held the appropriate hearings because it had changed from a constitutional amendment to a simple statute.
Wow.
Well, later on, the Senate did pass a statute, but whoopee-doo, that doesn't do anything for us.
Well,
we needed a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's put some names with some of those actions you're chronicling. One that you've mentioned here is Senator Tim Owens. He's out of the Overland Park area.
Right.
This guy is a RINO. This guy, if you have the opportunity to vote against him, people need to do that, right?
He's one of three senators that voted against keeping foreign law out of our state law here in Kansas. We had an opportunity to pass a bill that would refuse to allow any foreign
like Sharia or something.
Yeah, any foreign law to have any effect on our law where they don't give their citizens the same rights, or where our citizens would not be granted the same rights as we have under our Constitution.
Yeah, and that's insane.
What it says.
Who would be against that?
Well,
that's such a
Tim
no-brainer.
Owens was.
Now, on your list here for Tim Owens, folks can see that he votes 67% of the time with Senate Democrats. That's a guy that should be in the Democrat freaking party.
Well, that's the fiscal rating. If you take in the liberty issues and life issues and things like that, that percentage would be even greater.
But he needs to go. Now, another guy. Go ahead.
The other ones that voted against that were John Brattle, the Senate Vice President. Of course, he's retiring, and then a Democrat, Faust Cadeau.
And what about this other guy you have listed on here that I think needs to be highlighted for certain today? And that is Stephen Morris out of Hugoton.
Absolutely. He's been the Senate President since 2004. And he has the opportunity then to select those persons that will chair the different committees, and it's fairly obvious from looking at the list of chairmen for the major committees that only those chairmen that agree with their Progressive Alliance up there were 14 phony Republicans that created an alliance with the 8 remaining Democrats to control the Kansas Senate. By having that control, they select the leadership. They can appoint the committee chairman. They can control which bills even get a hearing. And if they don't want it heard, they'll take it from one committee that might be working on it and give it to another that'll squash it, which is what happened with the bioscience bill.
Yeah.
They took it from Susan Wagle, and they put it over in Terry Huntington's committee, and that was the end of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And folks can read on this page. They can read how that broke down. But you want to remember the name Stephen Morris. He's a Republican out of Hugoton. You get a chance to vote against this guy, you need to do that. Let's get another name, a real snake out of Riley County in the Manhattan area, and that's Roger Wrights. Talk about this guy.
Well, he falls in line with all the rest of them. I mean, they differ maybe on their life issues, but when it comes down to the liberty issues and the fiscal issues, they're all in cahoots with each other.
You know,
the life issues may be the only place where a few of these differ from each other.
Well, I was at the state sovereignty hearing, and Roger Wrights was there. And I'll tell folks that he was in the back tent panel watching people passionately give testimony on why Kansas should not be pushed around by the federal government, why we are a sovereign nation. Roger Wrights fell asleep during that deliberation. I caught it on video. And when we were making our Tea Party documentary film, you can see it. I was going to pull it out and show it there, and I visually saw it. I was there, and I was like, oh, my gosh, there's Roger Wrights falling asleep while people are talking about Kansas and laying their hearts out. And it's in the film. This guy has been hooked up with all the liberal organizations in Manhattan. He's really a destructive force. And I got the flyer in the mail. Even though I live in Salina, they still forward it from when I lived in Manhattan. And this guy is vying for your votes. Roger Wrights out of the Manhattan, Kansas area. Vote against this fool because he is part of the movement that is really hurting our states. Let's get some other names out here.
Let's talk about Roger just for one more minute, because we could talk a little bit more about the Healthcare Freedom Act. like
Okay.
I said, in 2010, both of the constitutional amendments were squashed. But in 2011 session, obviously we had the rout in the 2010 national elections,
Yeah.
and we had really changed a number of seats in the Kansas House. In fact, we changed enough seats in the Kansas House that when HCR 5007, which was the constitutional amendment for health care again, came up, it actually received more than the required two-thirds majority in order to send it out to the citizens by an additional 9 votes. So there was a tremendous turnover in people there, and the will of the people was heard in the Kansas House. But that didn't affect the Senate at all. It was sent up to the Senate as a completed bill from the House for Senate action. And again, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Owens sat on that the entire legislative session without a hearing and said, "Oh, well, there's no need to waste our time on this because it won't make the ballot until 2012." Well, 2012 rolls around, the 2012 session. Now the Supreme Court has agreed to hear it, and now, well, it doesn't make any sense to deal with this because the Supreme Court's going to rule in advance of us having an opportunity to exercise our vote. So their efforts, both in the Senate, these imposters in the Senate, has always been to support this overbearing federal government, to not do anything that might irritate that federal government, regardless of how much it might irritate us as citizens.
Well, they're sellouts.
You know,
They are.
to protect the federal authority over us is their entire aim.
Yeah, and I'm not looking for leaders that just want to battle the federal government for no purpose, but I want leaders that adhere to conservative values in the Constitution and say we're going to protect Kansas. We're representing Kansans. They're expecting us to do our job, and that is our job. And so when you come to these conflicts like Obamacare or other conflicts to where they want to impinge on the sovereignty of the state of Kansas and say, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and it's not in the best interests of the people of Kansas. I want people that sell out. I don't want a bunch of loyalists like to the King of England to just say, whatever, that's all fine. We're going to make it happen. Let's get some other names out here. Senator Jean Schodorf in the Wichita area. I get lots of information on her. Talk a little bit about her for a second.
Well, Jean is the exception to your common socialists. Most of them are pretty angry people, but she's a pleasant person to be around.
I've met her.
Obviously, she's engaging, charming, but believe me, her politics do not reflect the platform of the Republican Party, and she's right in there with Pete Brungard at 80% voting with the liberal minority. Same was true for Rattle and a number of others that had that extreme 80%. And that, again, that's just on the fiscal issues. If you add in the issues, the liberty issues of immigration and health care, or you add in life issues, the protection of the unborn and stuff, those numbers would probably be even worse than they are now.
And Larry, it is one thing when liberals that are doing these destructive things are mean and nasty. That makes them even worse. But even when someone is socially nice, maybe Jean Schodorf is a person you would love to have coffee and donuts and chat about the weather. She may be personable. She may be amicable to a good conversation. That's great. But we're looking for leadership in the state of Kansas. We need people that will vote on things in a way that represent the constitutional values and the belief of the majority of people, what I believe in the state. And if you can't make it there, you got to go. And go ahead.
Let's take another issue that's current and should be of a very extreme concern to all Kansas taxpayers, especially those that pay tax and property tax, those that own property and pay taxes on that. And that's the cost of education. These particular imposters that we're talking about are the ones that support in increasing budget for education or other types of state entitlement.